Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Sunday Talk within the Nine-Sided Circle. Today is July 19th. I'm going to get it right this time. And today, your hosts, myself, Nora Kyle, and
your other host, Mushtaq Ali.
Yeah, we are going to lead a discussion about premature assumption of enlightenment. So that's what we have to look forward to today. But prior to that, we just want to touch base and say the YouTube spiel. And how does that go, Mushtaq?
How does that go? Today it goes like this. So, thank you for joining us. We are really happy to have you here. And we would be both delighted and grateful if you took a moment to go down here and hit that subscribe button and hit the little bell while you're at it so that you can find out when we upload new videos, which is once or twice a week usually.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, you can join our mailing list and find out many, many interesting things. Interspersed with long gaps of us not doing anything because we don't fill your mailbox up with email. You'll get our newsletter once a month and you'll get notifications when we do something like this. And so we would love it if you subscribe. We would love it even more if you would comment.
Yes.
We're starting to get a bunch of comments now, and it's really fun to see what people are learning from the videos. And sometimes they love us, and sometimes they hate us, and it's all good. And
we welcome all of that.
Yeah, speaking of loving us, feel free to hit the like button down there. Give us an old thumbs up so that we know that you care, and help us get up in the stats for YouTube. Or if you hate us, hit the thumbs down button. We've only gotten one thumbs down so far, and that tells me that we're not doing our job. We need to agitate more. Be more radical.
Rally, shake our fists.
Yeah, this one's going to do it, though. Tonight, the subject is triggering enough to a whole lot of people.
Ooh, triggering, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mushtaq, I know you have a lot to say about our topic today.
Yes.
Yes.
So this is going to start with a couple of stories. So some years ago, when I was living with my teacher, and I lived with my teacher for a long time as one of his the people who worked for him or served him, or however you care to do it. He came into the office where I was and said, we were having a special guest next week. Mr. Lee is coming. Now, people used to want to come and visit the Sheikh all the time. And most of the time he was, how do you say, less than entirely enthusiastic about having visitors. Most people came because they wanted something, they wanted recognition from him, or they, there's always something. But this was different. And he said, I want you to get in contact with this person, and you're going to, with her, arrange so that we can provide a brunch to Mr. Lee and his students when they get here. And we want to do this right. And so I called up this woman whose name was Mariana, and we talked several times. She's a very nice lady. And we worked out dietary requirements, all of this kind of stuff. And Mr. Lee came, and absolutely amazing fellow. I had heard about him before. I had heard that he was like really abrasive and obnoxious in his talks, and did everything he could to drive people away. But that was not the case for this, because he wasn't doing a talk. He came specifically to hang out with my teacher, and it was amusing watching them. These two bright little lights just kind of blinking at each other. And anyway, we had a good time, and questions were asked, answers were questioned, all of this good things. And then they went off to do whatever else they were going to do. And sometime later, I found out that Mariana had written a book, or had just published a book that she had been working on, called Halfway Up the Mountain. And so I thought, I know this person. I'll get a copy of this book, and maybe if I run across her again, I'll get her to sign it, and then it might be worth something 10 years from now when she's all famous and everything. I always think these things. And so I got the book and I read it, and the book was really good. It hit the nail so much on the head for some things. And specifically, it helped me to clarify my own experience. And this is the other story. So sit back, folks, and let me put you in the Wayback Machine and take you back years and years and years into the 1950s. And late 1950s. So when I was 13 years old, my family moved from New Mexico to California. And I took this at the time as a tragedy, because it had uprooted me from my entire life and my way of life and my support system and the people around me who I had for guidance and all of this stuff. And so I was feeling a little bit alone and isolated. And so I decided to do some heavy duty work on myself as much as I knew it at that young age. And so I went out into the hills near where we were living, and I spent a couple of days out there. Believe it or not, you could do stuff like that back then, even if you were a kid. You know, your parents didn't freak out. The police were not called. You just said, I'm going to go. I'll be back in 2 days. And my mother was like, all right, don't do anything stupid. So I'm out there. I'm fasting. I'm doing all of this stuff. And all of a sudden, without any warning, cosmic consciousness sneaks up and slaps me upside the head. And here I am in this state. I am one with everything. I have the ability to see through the eyes of every living thing around me. And that means discovering that everything around me was living. I could see through the eyes of things that didn't even have eyes. But, you know, my being was one with all being. And it was profound and amazing, and I had never heard anything about this. And it went on for a while, and then it was gone. And I was back into my normal everyday consciousness going, what just happened? How do I get back there? I want to get back there. I want to go back to that state, because that was like happy and blissful and really, really wonderful. And I can tell you that in hindsight, this was perhaps one of the worst things that could ever happen to you at that age. Somebody who is 13 or 14 years old does not have the maturity or the cerebral development to deal intelligently with that kind of state. And so I then spent several years trying to figure out how to get back there. And in some ways I was lucky, because I had no concept of the idea of enlightenment at the time. Because if I did, I would have probably gone, oh, I was enlightened. And that would have probably made everything worse. So later on, I meet my first teacher. And I tell him about this. And he's like, oh, you had a state. It's okay. Don't worry about it. That happens. Best thing for you to do is pay no attention. Because, yeah, it's all groovy and everything, but you can't really do much with it. It doesn't take you to where you need to go. And this, of course, was shocking to me. This was kind of a revelation because, you know, I'd been reading books and listening to people talk and doing all of this stuff. And everybody was wanting the bliss and the cosmic consciousness and all of this, like this was the thing. And there were people who were basically, they made their rep on having cosmic consciousness. They could go into these states of bliss and oneness. And there are still a lot of people like that out there. And it's very seductive and it's very addictive. But thank God I had somebody who I was willing to listen to that said, that's nothing. Ignore that. And so that got me asking, well, if that's not enlightenment, what is enlightenment? The answer is no such thing as enlightenment. There is no word in the languages of the people who talk about this stuff that is equivalent to enlightenment in English. You know, in Arabic, you can say itlaq, which means liberation. Liberation from what? Liberation from the bonds of the ego. You can say fana, which means annihilation. Annihilation of what? Annihilation of the ego. In Sanskrit, you have moksha, which is also liberation. You have these ideas that have nothing to do with light, with having the light turned on or anything like that. And so that's the first problem with enlightenment, is that we cannot really define it in a way that makes sense. Does that make sense so far?
Thumbs up. Yes. Yes. We're good.
It makes some sense.
Okay, does it make some nonsense too?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the issue is. Possibly that enlightenment implies that there's a self that's still there to be improved.
No, enlightenment doesn't really mean anything.
Okay.
I mean, how do you define enlightenment? Ilmar, you're good at these things. How do you define enlightenment?
By essentially avoiding the term.
Yes, that's because you're smart. So last week we talked some about traps. And this is not exactly a trap like we talked about last week. What it is the premature assumption that you've arrived at the top of the mountain. I don't know, how many of you guys have climbed up a mountain? Yeah, so my first experience in doing serious climbing up the side of a mountain was in the Sisquoc Range. And I was heading to what was then the Condor Reserve, probably still is the Condor Reserve. And I was going up these switchbacks that were like, you know, the mountain is like straight up and down almost. And we're going up these switchbacks. And I see what looks like the top of the mountain. And I'm going, oh my God, we're almost there. We're almost there. And I get there and it's just a ridge. And I look up and there's this whole more, you know, half again the mountain. And then I start wondering, is that just a ridge that I'm looking at? Is this just a giant con job and I'm going to be climbing up this thing for the rest of my life? That's kind of what it felt like. And so that's what happens is people do a certain amount of development. Usually they get a state of cosmic consciousness. And then they go, oh, I'm enlightened. And they sit there. In the most extreme cases of this, and I have mentioned and or made fun of these people before, you get these guys who enter into this state of oneness and bliss, and they just sit there. And usually their followers will put them in a cave, and they will come by every day and dust them off. Make sure that there are no spiders spinning webs in their nose and things like that. And you know that they're still alive because their hair is still growing and their fingernails are still growing. And so you give them a trim and you clip their nails and, you know, polish their elbows, whatever you do. And then they just sit there in that state, in this state of cosmic consciousness where they have become one with everything. And, you know, that's kind of groovy. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's not what we're after. Now, I will give you a working definition of what I mean when I say enlightenment, however rarely I like to use that term. What I mean is the ability to enter into and maintain the awake state for as long as is necessary, and to be able to function in this state. Now, as far as I can tell, even with the most enlightened guys that I've ever met, they do not spend 24/7 in the awake state. If they did, they wouldn't know what they wanted for dinner, or what they were going to wear the next day, or whether or not they wanted to go to a movie. All of these things require reference to the ego. But they enter into the awake state whenever they need to, and they hold that state for as long as is required of them. Does that make sense? Now, this is a radically different definition of enlightenment than most people are used to. So let's argue about this. Ilmar, that's your cue.
I see, okay. Well, pull one of those books off the bookshelf behind you there, which no doubt is virtual, and look it up. But no, I guess my question would be, who's requiring somebody to be awake? You know, I mean, you're saying, by your working definition of an awake state is, you know, you can maintain, you go into it and maintain it as required, so to speak. And so for what is that state required, and by whom?
Well, according to my book here that I just pulled off the bookshelf, and unfortunately for you, the book is mostly green, so it's a little transparent. It's one of these mystical books. So the only person that requires you to enter into that state would be you. And you would do it to accomplish certain things. For instance, when I work with somebody, I make sure that I'm in the awake state, which means I'm present there. There's various terms for this state. But I think the awake state is good enough. It means I'm present. The voices in my head are turned off. I am oriented in the space that I'm in. I am not thinking about the future or the past. I am attending to the now.
But still working from the viewpoint of a persona, or maybe ego.
No, the persona is
No?
kind of, the persona becomes quiet. Everything that you talk to, I mean, right now, I am translating what I am saying through the tool of my persona, because it's the one that speaks English.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that's my curiosity then, is the relationship between you awake and your activity in the world, which does seem to require a persona. And so I'm kind of wondering about that relationship there.
What are you wondering about it?
Well, I mean, it seems like a persona is required in order to function in the world.
It's certainly useful, yeah.
Yeah,
And as I've said before, you never lose your persona.
right.
It
So
just gets cleaned up, and it knows when to shut up.
So when you're awake and dealing with, say, one of the people that you're working with, the persona is present, right? But you've got a viewpoint which is in some way transcends the viewpoint of that particular persona. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That sounds good. Yeah, we can say that.
Yeah, yeah. That makes sense to me. Though, okay, so here's one way to push that question. It seems to me that we are always operating from a particular viewpoint, right? That viewpoint is sometimes a socially created persona. But I guess what you're suggesting is that we can have a separate, unique viewpoint. This is not the all in all of a cosmic consciousness, but a particular viewpoint impinging in the world of forms. But that viewpoint itself is not a persona. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, to quote from the Yoga Sutras again, the teachings of yoga are the stilling of the twistings and turning of the persona of the cognitive mind.
Mm-hmm.
When that, which is in Sanskrit, it's called chittavritti, it means the rolling of the mind, is stilled, then the seer is in its proper place as witness to the given. When you are in the awake state, you are the seer that is in its proper place, and you are witnessing what is being given to you.
And the proper place is still a particular viewpoint on this world of forms, right? It's not some sort of cosmic consciousness without any particular viewpoint, right? It's still a particular, and your view, on the gross assumption that we might on occasion both be awake, we would still be dealing from two separate viewpoints, right?
Sort of, kind of. I mean, the way I experience it is that when I'm in the awake state, I feel that I am filtering things through the viewpoint of this body in this place. And somewhere in the back of my awareness is that sense of, yes, this is all connected. That which views the world through my eyes is also that which views the world through your eyes. But it's not all consuming.
Right.
Cosmic consciousness is all consuming. In my experience, it's like, holy crap, wow, I am seeing that I am me and I am Ilmar at the same time, and I'm looking at me through his eyes as I'm looking at him through mine.
Right, exactly. And for us to function in the world, we need to have that specific viewpoint, presumably to a large degree defined by the body and its sensory apparatus. And because it seems to me sometimes that gets glossed over. It's almost like, it's either you lose your individuality completely or you're not awake, or whatever, and that seems to me to be false. And I don't think that's what you're saying, So, so I think I see what you're getting at, and I have no real issue with that.
Damn it.
I'll come up with something. You can
I count on you for that.
I know. I'll work on it.
Cherie, what do you think?
Well, I would love to get to Cherie, but we also have a question from Mr. Keem that I was waiting.
Go for it. Give me the Mr. Keem question.
Mr. Keem asks, why should we not stay in the awake state all the time?
Because sometimes we want to remember that we need to take our daughter to school. The awake state is not very good at, see, if I go, oh, I have to go and take Noor to the store, then I'm not in the present, right? That requires me stepping out of the awake state and creating an illusion of going to the store with Noor so that I can know what it is that I want to do. Now, when I'm walking to the store with Noor, I can do that in the awake state. But when you have to go inside, when you have to turn inward away and disconnect yourself from the etic reality, from the reality as it is, so that you can figure out, oh, I want to wear a black shirt today because if I wear a green shirt, I'm going to look like a floating head. Or I want to have eggs today because those eggs have been sitting in the refrigerator for a week and I want to eat them so that they don't go bad. You know, all of these things are egoic in nature, and that's what the ego is for. That's its proper place. So that's why you don't stay in the awake state all the time.
Did you have something to add, Mr. King? Because I noticed that you unmuted yourself, and I wanted to give you an opportunity if
Yeah.
you did.
Tell us things, by all means.
I was thinking that if like the egg thing, can you like thinking about the egg, eating the egg, but you're still awake at the same time?
You can eat the egg and be awake at the same time. But if you're imagining yourself cooking the egg and thinking about eating the egg, that's a different state. Nothing wrong with that state. It's a very important state and we need to have access to it. We just need to remember that it's a different state than the awake state. The awake state requires that you are present in the world right now. So you can dream of cooking the egg and then you can wake up and eat it. You can wake up and cook it.
All right, thanks for that, Mr. King. So if sure you would like to pop in.
Yes.
No, I'm just enjoying what you're saying. So are you talking about degrees of being awake?
No.
And so
Not
you're
degrees.
either awake, or you're asleep or awake.
Yes.
Okay. And so the experiences of that cosmic awareness of being one with everything, do you describe that as there are stages of experience towards enlightenment?
I don't think that is an experience that leads to enlightenment in and of itself. I think that experience will detract from enlightenment. It is so incredibly seductive. I used to sit around when I was like 14 and 15 and try and meditate myself into that state. I didn't know exactly that that's what I was doing, but I would surround my memory and evoke the memory of that state all the way around me, trying to get back into it.
So is this like shunya or something like that, where you go into the great big bliss of light, and openness and the big nothing, and then you're sort of
only
stuck.
You can't get there from here. That's the most amazing thing about it, is you cannot get back to that state no matter what, because that state does not exist in the past.
So that state is, how's that bestowed on you?
It can be bestowed on you by your own work or by somebody who knows how to activate that state, doing Shaktipat or transferring Baraka, or however you want to say. It's a trick, and you can invoke that state in other people. You can evoke it in yourself. When I learned this, I discovered that it was easy to go into that state, and at the same time, I just didn't care anymore. It's like the entire state lost its seduction. It was like, oh, ho hum, I'm one with everything. All right, that's cool. Look, I'm looking at the eyes of a sparrow. Oh, listen to the tree. The tree talks very slowly, but not as slow as the rock.
So that state of experience doesn't invoke compassion or a sense of feeling towards those living things that you can see through their eyes.
When you're in that state, it can. When you're out of the state, you tend to lose that. But the thing is, when you're in that state, you're pretty much non-functional.
Okay.
We had a word for it back in the 60s. We called people who got into that state and tried to stay there bliss ninnies. And because it's not easy to leverage yourself in there just with your own consciousness, most of the bliss ninnies started trying out various interesting substances to see if that would get them back in, and that often had tragic effects.
Because it can be addictive as well, right?
Oh, it's totally addictive.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was totally addicted to the idea of that state as something that was desirable. Yeah, and now imagine that you are a junkie and you've had all the heroin that you could ever want, and then all of a sudden it's taken away and somebody's holding it out here, like 2 arms lengths away from you, and you can't get to it. That's kind of what it feels like.
So describe what is the state of flow then, when people say they're in flow.
The state of flow, if they're in flow, is going into the awake state and moving through the world. That's pretty much it. Moving through the world in the awakened state. I think it's a special circumstance of the awakened state in that it requires a little practice, because you have to be able to hold that while things are going on around you, like somebody's trying to stab you with a sword, or you were swooping down the side of a mountain in a wingsuit, or you're on a surfboard and a 40-foot wave has just swept you up and you've got to ride that pipe or die. Things like that. So it's a special state of the awakened state. And because you're moving through it in the way that you do, it also can become addictive. There is a dark side of flow that most people don't talk about.
Talk about it.
Talk about it.
Well, we've done a talk or two on that subject in the past as well.
But I can say, when you hit flow, which is a specialized case of the awakened state, it feels really good. It's a little bit like combining the awakened state with just a touch of cosmic consciousness. Because you do have it. I mean, when I'm fencing, when I'm rapier fencing or side sword fencing, and I hit the flow state, me and my sword are one, me and my opponent's sword are one, me and my opponent are one, and I can feel what they're doing before they're done thinking about doing it. And that has a bit of a seductive feel to it. And if I thought that the only way I could get into that state was to go fencing, then I'd be out on the piste every day. And I'd probably do damage to myself, because I don't think I could sustain that much intense activity on a daily basis for all that long. At least not at my advanced stage. So.
All right, let me try to do a bit more of my job than here.
Okay.
So if I understand you, the awake state is you're being aware, whatever else is there, you're aware of the immediate physical environment, right? I guess I'm looking at, here you are planning Noor's lunch, all right? So and you're saying, or taking her to school if she was younger, whatever. Yeah. And you're saying that when you're in the planning stage, you're not awake. Whereas if you're actually walking her to school, you are.
You can be. You're not necessarily.
You can. Okay, you can be. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, why can't the planning also be something? I mean, you're aware of planning, and you're doing it consciously. It's not in your physical environment right at the moment, but it's in your, if you want, your psychic environment. You know, you're working through different scenarios. Why can't you be also considered to be awake in that state? Why this dual separation of physical reality from, I guess, mental reality, or whatever you might call it?
Okay. How often are you awake when you're dreaming?
Oh, I mean, I'm not certainly not claiming that whenever you plan or so forth, you're awake. Okay. What I'm questioning is whether it's a necessary condition of being awake that you're not engaged in things like planning or even watching a movie. I mean, if you're watching a movie consciously, realizing you're watching a movie, you could certainly watch it unconsciously.
I will tell you this because I have watched a movie in the awake state,
okay,
and it was boring as hell.
All right.
There was no meaning to the movie.
That I can grant. So, but the difference then is not between whether what's in your awareness is simply the physical environment, or also possibly things like plans and stuff like that, but rather what to the degree you're caught up in these, kind of like, I mean,
the degree to which you enter the dream with what you're doing. In order to enjoy a movie, you have to enter into the dream. It's called what is it? Suspending disbelief.
Yeah, suspending disbelief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to allow your mind to act as if what you're seeing, which is entirely illusionary, to be real.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And if I watch a movie in the awake state, I am very, very clear that nothing that I'm seeing is real, and I have no emotional contact to it.
Right. And that I understand. But why can't you, in an awake state, plan out Noor's day at school? You know, which petticoat is she going to wear, and which backpack is she going to take?
Well, let's take something a little bit more realistic, and let's say I'm going to make lunch for Noor.
Okay. All right.
Or better yet, make dinner, because I like making dinner for Noor.
He's good at making dinner.
All right.
So what I have to do is dream dinner.
Mm-hmm.
I have to have a dream of dinner first.
Okay.
And I can dream of the food that I'm going to make and how I'm going to make it and the effect that it will have on her and the presentation. And, you know, I can imagine different combinations of colors and try and feel what it is that she likes or would like best. And then, you know, I have a good dream about that. Once I've done that, which requires that I pull myself in from the now in a very specific way to do this planning, which to me feels just like dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
Then in the awake state, I execute the plan that I created because it requires me being present to do all of these things. It requires my awareness be in the room so that I know how long something needs to cook. I can perceive the temperature of the pan versus what the food needs. Is it too hot? Is it too cold? I can plate the dinner correctly. And I'm doing all of that in the awakened state, in the present time, just as somebody who does flower arranging is doing that there, or when Cherise Ken is doing his Sumi painting, he's in the awakened state. You can see it in his paintings. There is no hesitation anywhere in his brush in the paintings that I've seen him do. They're just there. He's just.
So what is the nut of the difference here? Because, you know, it's I don't think it's, you know, is it a concrete reality that you're attending as opposed to mental reality? Because, you know, I can imagine a very awake mathematician, for example, getting completely caught up in working through a particular theory, or a musician composing.
I like mathematics, and my experience of mathematics is when I am attempting to understand an equation, I am doing that in the dream. It is not in the awake state. If I look at it in the awake state, it's like, oh, okay, I don't care. You know,
and the mathematician, when he's in that state, looks at you cooking dinner and says, "Oh shit, I don't care about that. I am going to be focusing on this."
Yeah.
It seems so. You know, there's a different. You're making a distinction there.
I am definitely making a distinction, and it's a really important distinction.
I know, I understand that, and I'm trying to. And there's definitely a lot of value placed on that distinction. And
you know about the gorilla video?
The one where the gorilla walks through and nobody notices him?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, I do know. That's a great one. Yeah.
Okay, so here are, usually it's count the number of times the basketball is passed. And you're so focused on that you lose the entire reality. And the gorilla walks through and you don't see him. Now, if you just watch that video, not trying to count the basketballs, you can experience them being passed. But at the same time, you'll see the gorilla.
Okay.
And that's the difference between the sleep state and the awakened state. In the awakened state, the mind is quiet. And one of my teachers explained it to me like this. He says, when the ego is asleep, it's noisy, it's raucous, it's having dreams. When the ego wakes up, it's quiet. It's like a still pool. Nothing is on the surface making ripples. And that's what we're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And my contention is that with a certain amount of practice and working through your ego stuff, you can learn to hold that state for as long as you need to and work within it.
Okay.
And working within it is for specific purposes.
So Aaron chimed in and said, it seems that you change your relationship to the dream.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah. I mean, there seems to be definitely something right about that. And yet there's something here that's still bugging me. And usually when the things bug me like that, it feels to me like there's something unclear here. But I'm not sure I can articulate it right now.
Well, it doesn't have to be clear. It just has to be what it is.
Yeah. See, I think the distinction here can't be, is my attention on the gross physical world, or is the attention on some mental?
Yeah.
There's got to be something other than that. You know,
yeah.
It's a quality of attention, the being caught up in something. You know, but I can be caught up in my hike through the woods, in a sense.
Oh yeah, you can totally lose yourself on a hike through the woods. You can be lost in fantasy. You can do it when you're driving. Well, how many of you have done a long drive and it's a certain moment you stop and you realize that you have no awareness of where you've been for the last 20 miles?
No.
That's you driving in the dream.
But I can also be taking a hike through the woods and be completely engrossed in the smell of the woods, the texture of the moss.
Yeah, and so it's a matter of, are you there or are you lost in the future or the past?
Okay, future.
Are you lost in the chittavritti, the twistings and turnings of the vocal mind?
Okay.
The mind. And vocal is not even the right word, because the chitta is not just words, it's also pictures and feelings that are constantly being thrown at you. Yeah. And that's what needs to become still.
Or at least needs to be aware of.
No, that's what needs to become still. There's no at least anything else. This is full stop, period. That needs to be still.
When you're working with people, I mean, at least when you're working with me, I expect with other people, you know, you do seem to have a concept of the future.
Sure. I do have a concept of the future. Your concept, I mean, a concept of the future doesn't mean that I'm living in the future.
Okay.
Now, when I'm working with you, what I tend to do is put myself in the awakened state and listen to you talk and prompt you to talk until you say the one thing that says to me, oh, this is what we need to talk about. And you've probably noticed me doing that with you before. I mean, the last time we talked, to me at least, it was really apparent because it happened in the last third of our conversation. You said the one thing and it was like, oh, this is it. Let's talk about this.
I'm not sure. I think it seemed to me like there was more than one thing like that.
Yeah, there were several smaller things, but there was the one big thing. And I don't need to go into details with you about that on a public forum, but
Yes.
So when you were in the awakened state, you were not talking to yourself in your head about what's going on. You were not thinking of the future. You were not thinking of the past. You are not thinking outside the room. You are, as good old Baba Ram Dass used to say, you are being here now and nothing else. And you are allowing reality to present itself to you without comment, without consideration, and you're just holding the experience. You're not trying to fit anything into a particular model. When you go to a psychologist, they all have a model that they try and fit you into. You know, they're a Freudian, they're a Jungian, they are a transactional analysis, you know, whatever. They look at you and they take what you say and they fit it into these models. What we do is we try to not fit you into models because you're not a model. So the teaching has to do with experiencing you as you are and asking the questions to get you to that same state. Now, what does this have to do with the premature assumption of enlightenment? Let's get back to that because it is almost time to be done. We can wrap this around to the beginning again, like a big circle. So, people who have these kinds of experiences and are not rightly guided by somebody who is gone through it will tend to assume that what they're experiencing is enlightenment and then act as if they're an enlightened person. And there are hundreds of people out there doing this every day. People who make an assumption that they're awake when they're just living in a very interesting dream. And I'm not going to name any names, but you can find them on YouTube, for instance.
Plenty of that on YouTube. That's it's almost overwhelming.
Yeah, it really is. At some point, maybe in the forum, I will put together a list of videos, some of whom are of truly awake beings, and some of whom are full of, are of people who have prematurely assumed their enlightenment without finishing the path. And maybe a couple who are just utter frauds. And not tell you which is which. I'm not going to do that on YouTube though, because that would be me calling people names and not giving them a chance to defend themselves, and then they'd get all defensive and get deeper into their shit, and it does nobody any good. So, do not be fooled by states. Do not be fooled by being ecstatic. One of the worst things that ever happened to the Western world is whoever translated the word ananda as bliss. Worst translation of that word ever. So you have the famous saying, Sat Chit Ananda, which it can be reality, consciousness, bliss. That's how it's usually translated. But Ananda is not bliss. That's not what is meant by the word. A better English gloss for Ananda would be contentment. Bliss is like, you know, you're going around, you're all, I mean, if you want bliss, you know, go to a rave, do some ecstasy. You'll get all the bliss you can handle. That's not what it's about. Contentment is where you are sitting right where you are now, and everything is being allowed to be exactly as it is, and you are not resisting anything that is. You are allowing it all to just be there, and you're awake to it. And then you experience contentment, and that is the true Ananda. Make sense? Or as I like to say, I got this from an old Calypso song years and years ago. It's as clear as mud, but it covers the ground. All right, we have time for one or two last questions before we have to wrap this up for the night. Questions, going once, going twice, going 3 times.
I want to pick on Soha. Soha, what are you thinking about?
And she thought she was going to get away with that.
Exactly. I mean, honestly, I don't have a question. For me, the clarification between flow state and the blissful state, I mean, as you Mostar described, you're all in one and you're everything, and that differentiation was very fine and nuanced, and I really appreciate that. Very good questions. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Soha. Thanks for letting us put you on the spot.
Thank you.
All right. Well, then let's wrap this up for the night. Thank you, everybody. Especially thank you, Ilmar, because without you, we would not have the necessary goad sometimes, which is important because it would suck if there weren't anybody around to challenge my ideas, because I might start believing them myself. And then where would we be? Think about that.
I poke at him, but probably, you know, I could be.
You're too nice.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm too nice.
You're too nice. All right, folks, then we will see you next week with I think next week we're going to do a practice, just because I like doing those and they're fun.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good to me too.
All right, and again, I'm going to put a link to Mariana's book somewhere down there in the description for anybody who wants to find it. Ideally, unless you speak fluent Russian, don't get the Russian version.
I did by accident.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you found something interesting for the Russian speakers, Nancy.
Yeah. Just need to find a Russian speaker.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well,
All
thanks
right,
for
folks.
joining us, everyone. Always good to see you guys.
Take care.
Bye.